It was the summer of 1972 in Rochester, New York, a season of warm breezes, quiet neighborhoods, and a kind of trust you rarely find anymore. Gas was 36 cents a gallon. Kids played outside until the streetlights flickered on. Doors stayed unlocked. In the small slice of America, danger felt like something that happened somewhere else. But on a bright June afternoon, that illusion shattered. Angela Marie Thompson was 32, though with her bright smile and hopeful eyes, she often looked younger. She had been a pediatric nurse at St. Mary's Hospital for 8 years. Patients adored her gentle touch. Co-workers admired her dedication. She'd never once called in sick. Every morning, she rode her powder blue Schwinn bicycle to work. White nurse's cap pinned neatly in place, wicker basket fastened to handlebars. She lived alone in a tidy apartment on Elm Street, just 2 miles from the hospital, and dreamed of one day buying a small house with a flower garden. She wasn't married, but she wasn't lonely either. Her patients, friends, and especially her younger sister Margaret were her family. Margaret, 3 years younger, lived across town with her husband and 2 children. The sister spoke every Tuesday evening without fail, met for coffee every Sunday after church, and knew each other's routines so well that even the smallest break from habit was cause for concern. On Monday, June 12, 1972, Angela's day began like any other. She clocked in at 6:30 a.m., tending to sick children, comforting anxious parents, and even staying late to reassure the mother of a young boy with pneumonia. At 3:15 p.m., 15 minutes behind schedule, Angela signed out, waved to the security guard, and pedaled away toward Main Street. A neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor Hutchkins, saw her around 3:30, cap still in place, smiling as she passed by. Angela was less than half a mile from home. That was the last confirmed sighting. Somewhere between Oak Avenue and Elm Street, Angela Thompson vanished. Her bicycle, her nurse's cap, her small purse with her hospital ID badge, gone. By 6 p.m., Margaret noticed something was wrong. By nightfall, she knew something was terribly wrong. And before the week was over, an entire community would realize the safe, predictable Rochester they thought they knew was gone forever. When Margaret realized Angela hadn't called that evening, her first thought was that maybe her sister had stopped by the corner store or visited a friend. By 7 p.m., she was calling Angela's apartment phone over and over. No answer. Margaret drove the short distance to Elm Street herself. Angela's apartment door was locked. The curtains were open, the living room light still on. No sign of forced entry. The bed was neatly made. The kitchen sink was empty. It was as if Angela had never come home. Margaret called the Rochester Police Department at 8:14 p.m. The officer who took the report was polite but unconcerned. Adults were allowed to be missing, he said, and Angela might decide to visit someone or take a trip. But Margaret knew better. Angela was a creature of habit. She wouldn't disappear without telling her, without making arrangements at the hospital. And she definitely wouldn't leave her beloved bicycle behind. At 9:30 p.m., Margaret convinced an officer to at least drive the route Angela usually took home from the hospital. They found nothing. The next morning, Tuesday, June 13th, Margaret was at the police station when it opened. This time, she demanded a search. By noon, uniformed officers were knocking on doors along Oak Avenue and Elm Street. One elderly man, Mr. Harold Pritchard, said he thought he saw Angela pass by the day before, around 3:30, maybe closer to 4. She was riding fast, head down, as if she were in a hurry. Another resident, however, insisted she never made it past the old gas station on Main Street. By Wednesday, Angela's co-workers began calling the police too. She had missed 2 shifts without notice. For Angela, that was unheard of. The hospital confirmed she had no pending vacation days, no request for time off, and her paycheck remained unclaimed. The search expanded. Officers combed wooded lots, drainage ditches, and the banks of the Genesee River. Volunteers from the community joined in, some on foot, others on horseback. Flyers went up in shop windows and on telephone poles. Missing Angela Marie Thompson, but there was no bicycle, no cap, no purse, no trace. By the end of the first week, the case had already begun to cool. Detectives interviewed dozens of people, neighbors, co-workers, even former boyfriends. None of them knew where she might have gone. But one name came up more than once. Walter Brennan, a man in his 40s who lived 2 blocks from Angela. Some described him as friendly enough, others as strange, always watching. Police spoke with Brennan briefly. He said he didn't know Angela well, had seen her once or twice, and had been home all afternoon on June 12th. Without evidence, they had no reason to hold him. For Margaret, this was just the beginning of 30 years of unanswered questions. In the days after Angela vanished, the quiet streets of Rochester began to buzz with whispers. Some said they'd seen her bicycle leaning against a fence at the old fairgrounds. Others swore they spotted a woman who looked like Angela getting into a dark green sedan near Main Street. The police chased each lead, every phone call, every tip. None of them panned out. Then came the most disturbing rumor. A young man claimed he saw a woman matching Angela's description near the abandoned Miller warehouse late Monday afternoon, the very day she disappeared. She was with a man. The witness said the man had a strong grip on her arm. When she noticed the boy watching, she looked away. The police questioned warehouse employees and checked the building. Nothing. But the tip fit with a gnawing fear Margaret already had. If someone had taken Angela, it had happened fast, in broad daylight, and within minutes of her leaving the hospital. By the 3rd week, the search had lost momentum. The local papers moved on to other stories. Volunteers stopped showing up at the command post. Detective Howard Kane, one of the few still actively working the case, admitted to Margaret in private, "If we don't get something solid soon, we may never find her." For Margaret, giving up was never an option. She began keeping her own notebook. Every name, every sighting, every odd comment she overheard. She visited pawn shops looking for Angela's bicycle. She drove side streets late at night, hoping for a glimpse. One evening, a co-worker of Angela's mentioned something Margaret hadn't heard before. A week prior to her disappearance, Angela had told a fellow nurse she felt like someone was following her on her ride home. She didn't name anyone. She just laughed it off. Margaret didn't laugh. That was the first real crack in the picture of Angela's safe, predictable life. And it wouldn't be the last. For the next 30 years, Angela's case sat like a ghost in the Rochester Police Archives. Technically open, but in reality forgotten. Detectives retired. Witnesses moved away or died. Buildings along Angela's route were torn down, replaced by strip malls and parking lots. What once had been quiet residential blocks became busier, noisier, harder to recognize. But Margaret never forgot. She kept Angela's apartment exactly as it had been. Nursing uniforms hanging neatly in the closet, her favorite novels stacked on the nightstand, the rent paid month after month. On Sundays, Margaret still brewed 2 cups of coffee, placing one across the table for a sister who never came. She aged with the case. Her children grew up with the story of Aunt Angela, who vanished. They watched their mother comb through newspapers, write letters to police, knock on doors of strangers who might know something. Then, in 2002, 30 years after that summer day, Margaret returned to Rochester after a divorce. Older now, hair silvering, she moved into a small house just miles from Angela's old apartment. The city had changed, but Margaret's resolve hadn't. She decided to walk the route Angela had taken on June 12, 1972. The hospital, now a gleaming medical complex, was unrecognizable. Oak Avenue was wider, stripped of its towering trees. Mrs. Hutchkins' garden was gone, replaced by a convenience store. But as she neared Angela's old street, something caught her eye, a patch of dense woods that hadn't been there before. It was now part of a small city park, built in the 1990s after old industrial buildings were torn down. Margaret followed a narrow, overgrown trail away from the main path. It led to a secluded clearing, silent but for the rustle of leaves. And there, tangled in vines and moss, was a bicycle. The powder blue paint was faded and rusted. A wicker basket clung to the handlebars, rotted and broken. Margaret's hand shook as she brushed away decades of debris. She knew this bike, Angela's bike. Searching the rusted frame, she found it, the serial number. She had written it down 30 years ago, copied from the hospital security log. It matched perfectly. For the first time in 3 decades, there was real evidence. Detective Lisa Rodriguez took Margaret's call seriously. The bike was photographed, tagged, and sent to the lab, though after 30 years in the elements, hopes for usable forensics were slim. But the bigger question was, why was it here? Old property maps revealed that in 1972, this wooded area wasn't a park. It was privately owned land belonging to a man named Walter Brennan. Brennan had lived in a small house on the eastern edge of the property from 1968 to 1984. Neighbors described him as reclusive, unfriendly, and odd. He had worked as a maintenance supervisor at the now-defunct Riverside State Hospital, a psychiatric facility shuttered in 1969 after multiple scandals. During his time there, 3 female patients had disappeared. All were listed as voluntary departures, despite being severely ill. Police had briefly questioned Brennan in 1972 about Angela's case. He had an alibi and was dismissed as a suspect. But Rodriguez learned something the original investigators hadn't connected. Brennan had been questioned in at least 2 other missing person cases in the late 1960s. Both young women, both never found. It was becoming clear. Angela's disappearance may have been part of something much larger. Officially, the department gave Rodriguez no extra resources. Unofficially, she told Margaret, "If anything's going to happen with this case, it's going to be because of you." So Margaret started digging, literally, using library archives. She traced Brennan's property lines beyond the current park boundaries. In a secluded section of the woods, she found the crumbling foundation of an old maintenance shed Brennan had once used. Scattered nearby were rusted tools, scraps of clothing, and a woman's single shoe. Then, in a patch of disturbed earth, Margaret's trowel hit metal. She unearthed a rusted box. Inside, wrapped in decaying plastic, were driver's licenses, 7 in total, belonging to women aged 19 to 35, all from the late 1960s to mid-1970s. There were also photographs, black and white, surveillance style, of women walking to work, riding bikes, shopping. The dates scrawled on the back spanned nearly a decade. One photo showed Angela mounting her bike outside St. Mary's Hospital. It was dated June 10th, 1972, 2 days before she vanished. It wasn't random. It was hunting. Margaret took the box to Rodriguez. Instead of relief, she saw hesitation. Multiple victims meant multiple jurisdictions. Some of the women were from other counties. Then came the warnings, anonymous calls telling Rodriguez to leave alone. Files from the original 1972 case had vanished from police storage. Hospital administrators worried about liability. City officials feared lawsuits and damage to Rochester's reputation. Margaret went public. Channel 8 News aired her story. Cold case breakthrough. Missing nurse's sister uncovers evidence of serial crimes. The phones lit up. Tips poured in. Elderly residents remembered Brennan's strange behavior. Some claimed they'd seen him following women. Others remembered him trespassing. But Brennan was dead, gone since 1995. If he had killed Angela and the others, the grave had taken his secrets. Piecing it together, Margaret believed Brennan had stalked Angela for days, photographing her, learning her route. On June 12, 1972, he intercepted her, likely luring or forcing her onto his property. The shed, the trophies, the photographs, they told the rest of the story. The bicycle had been hidden in the woods, left to rust, while Angela herself had likely been buried somewhere on Brennan's land, later disrupted by development. Angela was almost certainly one victim among many. There would be no trial, no confession. But after 30 years, Margaret finally knew. Margaret framed Angela's hospital photo and placed it on her mantle. The truth was ugly, but it was better than endless not knowing. She created a foundation for families of the missing, lobbying for better cold case protocols and stronger preservation of evidence. She pushed for longer statutes of limitations for serious crimes. What she had uncovered wasn't just the fate of one woman. It was a hidden history of predators shielded by institutional failure. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. And in Rochester, the ghost of Angela Thompson will never truly rest. "If I learned anything," Margaret said in her final interview, "it's that you can bury evidence. You can bury the truth, but you can't bury love. Love will dig it up.